On today's episode, Ghost's Opus Eponymous, a review of their classic debut album on Rise Above Records, and much more coming up. Welcome, ghouls, ghoulettes, and guesties. This is GonstFM Off Air, the official podcast companion to 66.6 GonstFM, the radio station dedicated to the band Ghost and the Gonst posting community, broadcasted live once per month on the Stationhead app. I'm Richie, aka Papa X, aka Papa Me Emeritus, as so lovingly named by the Gonst posting community. If this is your first episode, I highly implore you to check out the first release titled, What is GonstFM? However, if you're familiar with the program, you know why you're here. Today I'm going to be talking about Opus Eponymous, but it's not necessarily a fresh recording. It still holds my opinions and everything that I have thought and still think about the record. The audio portion of the review segment was actually recorded in October of 2023 during the 13th anniversary of Opus Eponymous. It had just been released as a royal blue variant, limited to 500 copies through Rise Above Limited. I'll speak briefly about that vinyl and break each track on Opus Eponymous down one at a time. I will also be giving a little bit of history and lead up to both the band's formation and the recording of what, in my opinion, is one of the most badass records to ever be released by any rock band. The album in question, Opus Eponymous by Ghost. The congregation, aka the fans of this band, usually call their albums Sacred Psalms. This Sacred Psalm was released on October 18, 2010 on Rise Above Records. It was actually released in North America on January 18th of 2011 and then in Japan April 6, 2011. It was produced by Gene Walker, which was one of many aliases, if you will, used by the frontman of the band. Most people call him Tobias Forge, which he has gone with in several interviews, but in his country of Sweden, it's actually Tobias Forge. So if you hear me calling him Tobias, that is exactly why I'm calling him that, because that's how it's pronounced. This being my favorite album from the band, I am honestly hoping I do it justice. So I know there are people out there listening that are huge fans of this band. As am I. I'm a huge fan of this band. But for those of you that are unfamiliar with this group, or you have no idea what you're getting into, I'm going to try to give you as much background on the making of this album before I actually jump into a track-by-track review, because it's, like I said, it's been a while since we've done a music review on the podcast, and usually the way we would do it, back in the day, was we would take it track by track, and we would play some music along with it, and, just go from there. So, to the making of this album, and actually the formation of the band, it's wild because even though Elizabeth, which it's pronounced Elizabeth. Again, this is another enunciation thing that I will be rolling with because these are how these songs are pronounced, so bear with me. Even though Elizabeth was the album's only, quote, single, and that was released in June of 2010, June 20th, in fact, the very beginnings of this band and this album go all the way back to 2006. And the writing and recording all happened around 2006, 2007, 2008, so roughly a 3-year span. Tobias has actually said before that the song Stand By Him, which is the 5th track on this album, was the song that basically started the band. Presumably in his former band Repugnant, he started playing a riff to the rest of the group and was explaining that it was probably the most heavy metal riff that has ever existed. In his own words, the chorus to the song, once he started coming up with it, haunted his dreams, and that every time he picked his guitar up, he ended up playing that exact chord progression. So when he put the words in, he said that it seemed to call for like a satanically oriented lyric. And again, this was back in 2006. And this is whenever they came up with the name Ghost. And it seemed to all kind of congeal together that this was an entire concept that he could put out, for his love of, opera, theater, traditional Scandinavian metal, horror films. And then, believe it or not, the lyrics to that song were originally written in Swedish. If you jump a little forward to 2008, Tobias had gotten with a former bandmate in Repugnant, Gustav Lindstrom, and they recorded demos of Stand By Him, Prime Mover, and Death Knell. The songs themselves are absolutely what drove the band to go with the theme that they're under. Now, the band history is something I won't get too heavy into because that is absolutely a topic for another day, because I could probably sit here for a good 3 hours just talking about all of that. But Tobias is absolutely the main credited songwriter. And even then, on the earlier albums, he went under the pseudonym of Ghost or A Nameless Ghoul, which every other band member on stage goes under the moniker A Nameless Ghoul. But very early, when the material was actually being written, it was still just a project phase. It wasn't like even a full band. It was just these songs and a logo that Tobias had like just scratched together, like the actual name of the band. He was just scratching it together, doodling it. Tobias actually, believe it or not, worked at a call center like during all this shit. And even in his own words, he didn't know shit about computers or any of that stuff. He, in his own words, he's just really good at bullshitting, which I think is fucking hilarious considering he fucks with everybody. Anytime the Puppet Emeritus character is about to be swapped for a different person. Again, another story for another time, but we will get there. So the band was coming together because of the material, and the lyrics were all leaning into a very dark area, which again, it lends itself to the 70s doom metal vibe that this album was starting to shape up to sound like. And what really sold the look was that Tobias was sitting there going, we can't look like this. And truly, anybody that knows this band will tell you this. They could not possibly look the way they do out of costume and do these songs. I love Tobias to death, and I'm sure that he would say the same thing, but he's dorky. We're all dorky in some form or fashion. He never wanted to be in the spotlight, which is why he came up with the idea of performing under like cloaks or like some kind of hidden identity. In fact, he didn't even want to be the front man of this band. He wanted to be the guitar player. He auditioned several singers and they all turned it down. So he was just, had that mind of like, fuck it, I guess I got to do it myself. And he fucking did it. Which leads Tobias to, take the position himself, So jump to March 12th, 2010. We're about to go back in time, MySpace days, because that's where the demos wound up. And in his words, that night, my whole life changed, because within 2 days of posting these demos, he was contacted by record labels. And then at the same time, his older brother, Sebastian, passed away, like the day those were released. If anybody knows the lore of this band and knows this about his brother's passing, Life Eternal from their fourth Sacred Psalm, Prequel, was actually written partially about his brother. But getting back to Opus Eponymous, the album artwork itself, much like all of Ghost's album art, be it a single, an EP, a full studio album, is a reference to a movie. The album artwork for this one is a reference to the television miniseries adaptation of Stephen King's Salem's Lot. And it's very obvious when you put the two side by side. And I know that this album is not a lot of people's cup of tea for various reasons, one of which being the sound quality, which was absolutely a choice, mind you. The sound quality had to do with where they recorded, how they recorded it, with the instruments they recorded it with, and also the fact that they were being driven by a very 70s doom metal sound, which doom metal, for a lot of people, they think specific things, but doom metal back then was very dark, deep, melodic, clean vocals, believe it or not. Not a lot of dirty and screamy, throaty vocals, very clean and melodic. To me, this album feels a lot like Merciful Fate, Black Sabbath, things like that. The guitar riffs are very amazing. But the album itself was recorded in a few weeks in a basement studio in Lyköping. I really hope I'm pronouncing that town correctly. Or Linköping. It was mixed and mastered at Organ Mastering in London by Jamie Gomez Arellano. And speaking of how it was recorded, they did the entire thing with a standard Gibson SG. Just one guitar is the guitar they used for all the guitar tracks on here. And it's presumably the same Gibson SG that Tobias used while he played guitar in Repugnant. And this kind of explains how they were limited as opposed to Infestissimum whenever they got more of a budget and a different label. The guitars probably sounded a lot more traditionally metal on this album. They played everything through Orange amplifiers, which Orange amplifiers kick so much ass. And it was a Thunderverb 50. They did it to get as much of a 70s vibe as possible. They didn't lose a lot of the tone or the sustain, which is really difficult to get out of very dry like dry settings, especially where they were doing this. They used one session drummer and nothing else. Tobias literally recorded most of the guitars along with Repugnant's guitarist. Tobias did all the keyboards, the bass. He's kind of the jack of all trades, master of none, and I'm pretty sure he would say that himself. I should note that I'm only covering the standard release of this album when we get to it, because they do have a Beatles cover on here of Here Comes the Sun, and it's only available on the Japanese version of this album. I'll be excluding it only because we're covering what was on the standard issue of this. But that is an incredible cover that you should definitely take a look at. But I will admit that that cover makes so much sense going on this album as opposed to just throwing it on there for shits and giggles. I mean, it absolutely has its place if you look at the story. They meant for it to be that way, but obviously it didn't matter as much to leave it on there if they were only going to do it as a Japanese exclusive. And I keep talking about themes, so every sacred psalm has a theme to it. There is an overarching story in the band's lore in the albums, which you can dive deeper into on YouTube. There's a ton of shit explaining it, but I'll do my best to give you the theme of Opus Eponymous, which actually directly ties into Infestissumam, the band's second release. Everything on this album, Opus Eponymous, is about an impending doom, a darkness, quite literally about the creation and the forthcoming of the Antichrist, the devil. I should note also that this being the first album, we're going to also be talking about the first Papa, leader of the band, if you will. Papa Emeritus the First. Now, anybody that knows this band, once again, knows that they switch out the frontman every so often for a different Papa, or, at one time, Cardinal Copia. I'm going to go ahead and just drop this bit of humor in here. I know Ghost fans are in on the joke. We get the humor. There's nothing you could say about us and our love for this band that's going to deter us from still going forth. You've got to embrace the fucking cringe, okay? The way Tobias Forge and Papa go hand in hand to me are like Andy Kaufman and Tony Clifton levels of bullshit. And I know anybody that knows who the fuck Andy Kaufman / Tony Clifton are will immediately recognize what I'm talking about. For those of you out there that have no fucking clue what I'm talking about, Andy Kaufman was a very deeply immersed comedian way back in the day, about 40 years ago, in fact, maybe even 50. And he had an alter ego named Tony Clifton, who was this really shitty, like, dickhead lounge singer, but he would go in full prosthetic makeup and perform under it. And when people started putting two and two together, oh, that's the same guy, Andy would show up and have another person in the Tony Clifton makeup. So it was pretty goddamn hilarious, actually. But anyway, during live performances with the band, he usually performs as the Papa Emeritus character, which did not actually originate, supposedly. I have to say supposedly or allegedly because reasons. It supposedly did not originate with Tobias. It actually originated from a completely different person. And I can't pronounce the dude's last name to save my life, so I will just say Peter H. He's also a former bandmate of Martin Persner, who is a former band member of Ghost. This person claims to have designed the character in 2005, way before Ghost ever formed. He never performed as the character and had agreed with Persner to let him use the character for Ghost as a band. That's kind of the long and short of it. There's also a direct correlation of Peter granting Tobias permission to use the character. But there's way more to that you can absolutely read up on. So do with that information what you will. But this was the first iteration of a Papa Emeritus figure. And he's one of my favorite Papas. In fact, he may very well be my number one favorite because I don't feel like this one gets enough love. This is, of all the Papas, we call him Primo or Peaw. I know a lot of people out there are just like, why are you giving him names? Like a lot of elitist people are like, what do you give him names for? Because it's fun. That's what you're supposed to do with this shit. You're supposed to have fun with it. And the reason we call him Peaw or the old bastard is because he's fucking old. He's supposed to be this fucking old guy in a pope robe, a satanic pope robe doing all this shit. Dare I say he looked metal as fuck. He's probably the most metal as fuck Papa that this band has ever had. And it's very interesting as to how the costuming for this Papa had come together. So the Rise Above Records boss, Lee Dorian, had no fucking clue what was really going to happen with this band. He used to sing for Napalm Death and Cathedral, which are two amazing amazing fucking metal bands. He signed Ghost only after hearing their music, never saw what they looked like or anything, and he just heard their music on MySpace, and he signed them to Rise Above after Dark Throne's drummer gave them a glowing review. But whenever Tobias showed up to start putting the physical material together for the band, like photos and, shit like that, he asked for a shitload of money from the label for a, quote, robe. And Lee was kind of like, what the fuck? He's like, I hadn't seen what they looked like, and he kept asking for money, like more and more of it, for this fucking robe that he needed to have a photo shoot. And believe this or not, it actually cost more than the photo shoot itself, which, credit to Lee, he said yes. And he was just like, well, and I swear to God, this is the quote. He said, fucking hell, it better be a decent robe. Then the photos came through, and the very first photos we saw, I was like, fuck. Because it's true. There is actually the very first photo of the band, like the promo shot, floating around, and it looks metal as hell. It's so fucking cool. The very first picture, this picture in question, it was taken by Tobias' sister in a friend's living room, and just a bunch of random people. It was Tobias in the Papa Emeritus getup, but then there was just a neighbor, and then like a friend of his and somebody else's friend, and they needed people to be in the ghoul outfits behind him just to make it look like a full band. In a lot of Evil Dead terms, for you guys out there that are horror fans, a lot of fake shimps in the background. Imagine doing all this recording, getting all these songs together, and then, again, this all goes back to Tobias's, quote where he's just really good at bullshitting. Imagine getting all this shit together, putting the music out that gets your band signed, but you don't have a backing band considering you are the band. He's like, you know what? I'm just gonna put some fuckers in some robes and we're gonna shoot this shit. And they did. Convincing. Very, very convincing. It looks cool as hell. So he winds up publicly unveiling the rest of the backing band at the Hammer of Doom Festival in Germany on October 23rd, 2010. Now, granted, this is 5 days after this album has released, okay? The very next day, they fly into London to play the Live Evil Festival at a 500 capacity venue. Yes, the Hammer of Doom Festival is their first show, but their first self-booked gig was the very next day at Live Evil. And the cool thing is both these performances are on YouTube, and dare I say the Live Evil Festival is probably the coolest looking shit ever. Because if you put this on and you watch it, and you don't know what to expect, I would have given anything to have been there for that, not knowing fuck all about this band, because it looks like a very deep-seated, dark, for lack of a better term, a fucking ritual that you are not supposed to have any fucking clue is happening, and it's very secretive, it's very underground. And that lent itself, I think, very heavily to the impending lore of the rest of what this band has become known for. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to get into the album itself, and we're going to review it, and we're going to break down the story, the in-album story of Opus Eponymous. Don't go anywhere.
Potato. Perfectly imperfect sculpture, bumpy and lumpy. You have no need to be pretentious. No other has your versatile nature, as a side or as the star. Let your beauty shine. Elevate the potato. With Bertolli Extra Virgin Olive Oil. Elevate your every meal.
And we are back, and we're going to get into the album breakdown and review of Opus Eponymous from Ghost. So, to me, this is a very huge, and a lot of people are like, oh, Ghost isn't metal. Sure, they're not completely metal, but there is a lot of metal influence and metal in their music. So when I say that they're a metal band, fuck off. They can literally be anything they want to be. And in this era, they were metal as fuck. I don't give a shit what anybody says. So this was a very, it's just a fucking treasure of an album, okay? To me, this is very much just a gold mine of like satanic heavy metal, fucking doom metal. There's a lot of inspiration from like probably the first two Merciful Fate albums, Pentagram, which Tobias has worn Pentagram shirts, Merciful Fate shirts. He wears band t-shirts when he's traveling on tour and just anyway. And the cool thing is you can pick out music. This album sounds like it could have been, put over horror films, which a lot of people are like, hey man, You really think Ghost is metal? They're just Scooby-Doo chase music, which, you know what? It's fucking great because you can actually put a lot of the songs on this album over old Scooby-Doo cartoons and it fucking works. So, chef's kiss. But this album absolutely echoes the sentiment where metal was about mood. I keep emphasizing it. Metal was about mood, musical heaviness, melody, and accessibility. That is one thing about this album that doesn't miss. It's fun. It's very fun. This album, for me, was very instantly likable, given the style of music that I grew up on. I grew up on old, like, Zeppelin and Sabbath and Megadeth, Metallica. I grew up on a lot of that shit. It's not leaning into the Megadeth portion, but I'm giving you what I grew up on. I also grew up on stuff like The Cure, which, again, nothing to do with this, but it just shows you, like, that was the time that I was taking music in. So this album resonates a fuckload with me. Now, I will admit that Ghost is less aggressive and much more accessible than Merciful Fate ever could have been, but there's just a lot of evil vibes on this. I think I put this very bluntly in a conversation with somebody that this feels like the music version of a snuff film. You're not supposed to fucking have heard this or, found it, but that's what it sounds like because of the production quality. Yeah, it's very solid. It's very enjoyable. There's no screaming. There's a few deep growls, if you will, but it's not like the growls you think they are. They're very much done in a horror setting, it feels like. Even though Elizabeth was the only single released from this album, I guarantee you that at least 5 of the songs could have been released as singles. In fact, most of these songs were played. Obviously, they had to have been played. It was their material in the earlier days, but even by the time their third album had dropped, they were still playing cuts off of this record. None of the songs are longer than about 4.5 minutes, and it's a 35-minute runtime overall, but it definitely flies by quickly because it pulls you in, and it's a journey. All right, so let's get into this album. So the way we typically do album reviews, in the past, we have talked about the albums track by track, while some of the music from said track is playing underneath. I'm taking a big risk here, doing this once more. We haven't done this for quite some time simply because standards and practices have changed as far as how music gets claimed on YouTube or even now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. But I do state that this does fall under fair use, and I am not doing this for any commercial reasons other than to just explain the music itself and celebrate this fucking band. So let's go. It starts with the track Deus Culpa, which is translated to Blame God, which, again, if you're going to open your entire discography, your entire musical catalog with a song called Deus Culpa, shit's about to get real because the second track in question, Conclave con Dio, is with nails, with God. And of course, I'll be explaining some story behind each of these songs, which is pretty much what this whole thing is about. It's about the impregnation of a sister nun to give birth to the Antichrist. Again, it's metal as fuck. So basically, we were starting off with this song, Deus Culpa, which it actually is a backwards version of a Swedish psalm that translates to shine/glistening over sea and shore, which celebrates the Star of Bethlehem and entreats people to follow it to salvation. So playing it backwards, it feels very sinister, and I fucking love that. And they're kind of emphasizing how wrong the spread of Christianity is to the heretics and how it is God's fault that the world is the way it is. So yeah, it starts off very calming. You listen to this, and if you've never heard this before or know what this band is or don't even know the genre, it's very soothing in a way, and it's very unassuming. It's churchy. You're thinking, man, I'm gonna get taken to church. I'm gonna experience this shining light. This, I wouldn't say happy, but it borders on positive, if you will. But the song Deus Culpa actually stops not very long in. And then we move over to Conclave con Dio, which is actually still played in concert to this day. And to me, it is one of the most heavy songs in their entire catalog. With this one, this is kind of where it is the satanic followers coming together to express intention of destroying the Christian order, which they choose to carry out, acting as unseen beings challenging the faith of anybody that encounters them. Their hatred of Christ is demonstrated through the lyrics "smear the smudge in bleeding palms," and it wipes away the divinity as symbolized through the stigmata. So, I mean, again, I swear to everything that we're getting into some fucking shit here, all right? This is like a fucking musical horror movie, and God, I would love to absolutely see a lot of this shit done as film someday. It could be done. You could probably take all of this band's discography and take the lore from it and make it a fucking series. So how do you not headbang to Conclave Condio? Now, granted, it's a sped-up waltz, but listen to that guitar riff. Metal as hell. Fucking love it. And when the first lyric is Lucifer, we are here for your praise. Dude. Like, you know this shit's about to get fucking real. Again, that song is very much still played at shows, and people lose their goddamn minds when it happens. In fact, I want to tell a quick funny story that I believe I forgot to mention when I gave our review of the Re-Imperator from earlier this fall. There were 5 gentlemen seated behind us that were very much not aware of Ghost whatsoever. They came for Amon Amarth, and when Year Zero came up, they actually left. Like hearing everybody chant the opening, choral arrangement for that. But when Conclave Condio started and the red lights hit and the thurible came out with Papa and the middle prayer of Satanas, we are one out of 3 Trinity happened, they kind of started getting legitimately flipped out. So I think that shit is hilarious because it is very much an act, if you will, but the way that this band presents it is so well fucking done that they're making people that had never seen them before, even in 2023, be like, what the fuck? Which leads me to the next track, Ritual, which I feel like Ritual is probably the most popular song on this album, which they still play Ritual live, and people lose their fucking mind because, again, it's definitely a 180 from Conclave Condio if you get into the chorus of the song, but the actual song itself has such a great guitar riff to start it. And in this song, the followers aforementioned in Conclave Condio are further establishing their cause and trying to, quote, procreate the unholy bastard, which is a lyric in the song. This is a group meeting to summon the Antichrist. It's also highlighting that they're becoming more than just a group. They're becoming a satanic clergy with ancient texts, chapels, rituals, prayers, things of that nature. Even in this song, the lyric, this chapel of ritual smells of dead human sacrifices from the altar. And it's crazy how hooky and catchy that this song is while still containing lyrics like this, which is the thing for most of this band's catalog. Have fun not singing along to this, okay? Legit, have fun not singing along to this goddamn song. This song tends to be everybody's favorite on the album. It's definitely one of my favorites, but that's saying a lot coming because this album is my absolute favorite. I don't feel like there's a terrible track in any of their discography, or this album in particular, but it isn't my absolute favorite on this album. Moving on to Elizabeth, which is also akin to how Christians idolize miraculous holy people. And in this setting, the clergy are kind of idolizing earlier devilish figures like Elizabeth Bathory, who had, legend has it, supposedly would kill and bathe in the blood of virgins to remain young and to appear young, and this story has been told countless times in several different mediums, but the way that the lyric, "You're still alive, Elizabeth," is portrayed is basically like, she's dead, but the beliefs and the actions live on through the clergy and through the people that worship these people. And it's sad to say, but Tobias can no longer sing this song live. It's actually out of his vocal range, and it's a travesty because this is actually a very great fucking song live, but I do get coming from, myself coming from a choir background and coming from a singing background, you cannot overdo it. Maybe he can sing this song here and there, but to do it night after night after night after night on shows and tours that range anywhere from like 70 to 140 shows, like, holy shit, you're going to kill yourself doing that. But I still stand beside the fact that it's a fucking excellent song. It's so good. It's so well constructed. The harmonies are really well done. There's even a key change towards the end of the song during the chorus. And as far as the composition goes, I feel like it's very underrated in the rest of their discography. It's an extremely underrated track. And again, it's a damn shame that they can't do it live anymore. And now we're going to move on to Stand By Him, which I mentioned in the front half of this episode is basically it's the beginning of the band. The guitar riff is what started this whole fucking thing off. In Stand By Him, it's the clergy basically seeking followers, particularly women. And they kind of highlight the violence of the church against people that stand against them. And they focus on witch hunts. There's actually a line from Malleus Maleficarum, and it regards the, quote, wickedness of female sexuality and how as long as you stand by Satan, you will have revenge on the church. And that line happens to be, all witchcraft comes from a carnal lust, which is in women insatiable. And the way it's said in this song is very evil sounding, and it's cool as shit. This is the Scooby-Doo-ish sound I'm talking about. I have actually seen this song put over some Scooby-Doo cartoons, and it looks cool as shit. But this song is very hooky, very catchy, very well done. This is probably the most underrated track on this album. I would venture to say that that Stand By Him, Satan Prayer, and Death Knell, which are coincidentally like 3 songs like back to back that I just mentioned on the track listing, are 3 of the most underrated tracks on Opus Eponymous. And speaking of Satan Prayer, we're moving forward to that one. Basically, having gained followers, the clergy is starting to lead the congregation in a prayer for basically for the birth of the Antichrist, who is going to be at the side of Satan, inverting the idea of sitting on the right hand of God, sitting on his left, and punishing anybody that rejects him. Again, the lore gets deeper and deeper and deeper. Hear us to prayer, our time you see a creed. And this is probably the most straightforward, lyrically speaking. Like, there's no mistaking. Like, no. Hear our Satan Prayer, our anti-Nicene Creed. The song itself is very cool. There's some awesome sounding synthesizer shit towards the end of it that gives it this otherworldly feeling. I feel like with that, they were trying to convey, like, here's the audible experience of feeling this prayer actually take shape, come to life, come true, if you will. And then it leads into Death Knell, which a knell, Knell, is just a fancy goddamn word for bell or chime, if you will. And that's another running theme throughout Ghost, is hearing the chimes, striking the death knell. The chimes are mentioned here. They are mentioned in Square Hammer, and they're again mentioned in Dance Macabre way later. And those are albums that happen way after Opus Eponymous. So this is where you get the initial chime. Hell, they even have a bell in the background of the second verse of the song. But with this song, it feels like this is where the ritual chamber is to represent the faith of Satan, with the upside down inverted crosses that they mentioned in the very beginning. And this is the part in the album where the woman is brought in to be impregnated with the Antichrist, as evidenced with the "As Victor Reaches Womb" lyric. And this is supposed to mark the end, or the beginning of the end, if you will, of Christian rule, so that the death knell is being rung to announce this. And I don't care what anybody says, this guitar riff is fucking metal. Like hearing that guitar riff with the drum pattern and the bells in the background. I know it doesn't, quote, sound metal probably because of the production, but look at the riff itself. My God, that is 70s Black Sabbath sounding shit. And early Black Sabbath was some of the most satanic sounding shit I have ever heard in my fucking life, and I fucking adore it. You like hearing the word adore and Satan in the same sentence? You know we get spooky and evil as fuck around these parts. It's not wrong to throw a little Hail Satan in there. Come on. So we're going to move to the last two tracks, which they bleed into one another, which this is another thing that I love about Ghost. On most of their records, their instrumentals, they either bleed into or have a song that bleeds into said instrumental. And we're going to move into Prime Mover and Genesis. So they're not one and the same. They're two separate songs. Prime Mover, the Prime Mover, is the mother of the Antichrist being set forth into the world pretty much unnoticed, and she is presumably once or still is part of a Christian nunnery, as her part in the ritual pretty much brings darkness upon her. The lyric, a varicose phallus obsessed and poised her, cast a veil of dusk upon the cloister. This is pretty much the light that was left in her leaving. Being the maternal slave that carries the Antichrist, she is the prime mover. So she will be setting forth in motion the satanic clergy's actions, even though the birth will probably end her life or her spiritual life, with the lyric with child of her grave. And again, I feel like this is one of the most underrated tracks on this album. It's so damn good. It's insanely good. It's insanely fucking good. And I seriously encourage anybody out there that's hearing this podcast, please check this album out once you're done and just give it a good front to back listen. There aren't any skippable tracks on here, and that's not me being biased. I truly feel like this is an unskippable album. I can't listen to this album and just hear one track on it. I need to start it, and I need to finish it. For me, that's how I know something is good. If you can capture my attention in the very beginning and you don't let go of it until the end, and then I'm still wanting more, you've done a fucking great job on an album. So let's lead into Genesis, which, in my opinion, is probably Ghost's best instrumental track. And it's a song that signifies the coming of the Antichrist. Basically, it's supposed to draw in followers of the faith and represent the spreading darkness across the world. And with that in mind, it 100% sounds like this. It's once again a sped-up waltz. The guitar work on this is really fun. There's a lot of dual harmony guitars towards the end. The bass having like a constant triplet rhythm going with the drums. And by the time that this song reaches its crescendo at the end, it bleeds into an acoustic, which is really wild to think about when it starts with church organs kind of leading you in, and then you're blasted with Conclave Condio, and you're kind of just not letting up on the gas the entire time that this album is taking place, and you get to Genesis and you get through the entirety of it, and then at the end, it's a really soothing sounding acoustic strumming pattern. And in a way, again, we're not going to cover the song and play it, but the song Here Comes the Sun, I would assume was put on here for being, like, it says Here Comes the Sun, like the sky, the sun, S-U-N. But I truly believe the tongue-in-cheekness of putting it on here would be like, here comes the sun, the S-O-N, sun, the Antichrist being born. After years of Christian rule and everybody standing against it, can finally bask in the birth of the Antichrist. It's a rejoice, if you will. And again, that's as far as I'll speak on the cover. Definitely check it out. You can 100% probably check the cover out on its own, because most of the band's EPs consist of cover songs, and that's what they're meant for. It's much a simpler album, I feel like, as far as story goes, compared to something like Prequel or Impera. But this album literally lays the groundwork for the rest of this band. And then it follows up with Infestissimum, which I think that is such an underappreciated fucking record that you should check out as well. But if you have not listened to this album, I hope that any of this episode has drawn you in enough to want to check it out. The band signed with Loma Vista Recordings after this album cycle. In fact, during a concert in 2012, Papa Emeritus I stepped down, and Papa Emeritus II took over, and thus began the tradition of changing papas every so often, which we'll get to whenever we do come back and talk about Infestissimum, which I do plan on doing in the future. But this is the genesis, if you will, of Ghost. And the album is currently available once more on vinyl via Rise Above Limited. It's another imprint of Rise Above Records. They did a 500 copy pressing. They may have done more, but when the initial release was announced, it was a royal blue variant and it was limited to 500 copies. I did get my hands on it finally, because most unsealed copies of this album in several different variants go anywhere from like $80 to $100 to $200. I've seen it. It's fucking wild. But if you can get your hands on it, it's $30 right now. You can check out Rise Above Records and try to get it through them, or do what I did. Go online and order it and support local businesses and support your local mom and pop record shop. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I hope I did it justice, and I certainly can't wait to talk about more of this band's music in the future. They are my absolute favorite band. I have a bunch of favorite bands. This one is definitely up there. As a side note, I do want to talk about something I did hear. I heard this album was once pronounced by a third party, and it was pronounced Opus Eponymous, and I wanted to fucking die because, oof. just throwing that out there as a little short story. I don't really have too much else to say on the record, so I'm going to bounce into the closing of the show, and hopefully you guys will check out more episodes in the future. So if you want to do that, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on social media, leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, especially if you enjoyed this episode. Go and talk about it in particular. I have to shout this out because it's a lot of fun. If you like shit posting, I know a ton of motherfuckers out there do. If you like shit posting and you love this band, you know what Gonst is. If you know what the fuck this band is and you follow it closely, you know what Gonst is, okay? Gonst was a supposed tweet on the band's official Twitter account. It just says Gonst, Gonst, and it was quickly deleted. And that started an entire fucking joke on its own. So if you like Ghost and you like shit posting, shit ghost, if you will, please come join Gonst Posting on Facebook. It's a group that I help admin, and we have a ton of fun in there. It is a place to celebrate the band. It is a place to celebrate yourself. It is a place to celebrate humor and just be silly and just be goofy and embrace your cringe and all that. So please come check us out. We have a lot of fun there. GonstFM also has merchandise, so scroll to the show notes below and click the link to go to our official TeePublic store, buy a t-shirt, buy a hoodie, buy a mug, buy a sticker, buy anything you want. Thank you very much for downloading and subscribing to the show. I hope to see you guys at a radio ritual sometime soon. You can scroll to the show notes below also and sign up on Stationhead to listen to GonstFM during our monthly radio rituals. If you would like to help GonstFM stay on the airwaves and on podcast platforms, you can donate to GonstFM on Venmo, or you can send a donation to PayPal using gonstfm@gmail.com. And so, my dearest Gonslings, this episode comes to a close. Some of you, I will see in internet land. The rest of you, I will see in Gonst Posting. Take care of yourselves. And remember, until next time, in Gonst we tronst. I'm Richie. I'll see you guys later.